This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to the Twilight Show. Thanks for joining me. Today, my special guest is Sean Dowling. Sean is an English teacher who's been based in Brazil now for 30 years. And the topic of today's show, English for Corruption.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome to the Twilight Show, everyone. I'm Stanley, speaking to you live from Mexico City. As I mentioned in the introduction, on today's show, I'll be talking to Sean Dowling about English for Corruption. Sean is an English teacher with 3 decades of experience in Brasilia, Brazil, holding a Delta and a Master's in TEFL from Birmingham University in the UK. He specialises in teaching English for specific purposes, or ESP, to government institutions involved in diplomacy, law, economics, and international cooperation. His unique expertise has led him to train powerful lawmakers, and his students have actively contributed to investigating some of the world's largest corruption cases. During his time, he has worked for different EFL schools in Brazil as a trainer and mentor, but today runs his own private company, which is invited to work with different authorities throughout the country. Join us after the Teachers Talk Radio news as Sean shares insights on English for Corruption and his remarkable journey in bridging language education with the fight against corruption.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading. Bet UK is empowering the everyday wins, cheeky grins, big conversations, budding aspirations. Our goal? To make EdTech accessible and teaching exceptional. Join the global education community on the 24th to the 26th of January 2024 as we make education better together. Tick it off your Christmas list today. Get your free ticket before the 13th of December deadline. Visit www.uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The Guardian features comment on a parliamentary report which is calling for an overhaul of secondary education in England. The House of Lords report says the education system for 11 to 16-year-olds is too focused on academic learning and written exams. The report also calls for the English Baccalaureate, or EBAC, introduced by Michael Gove during his tenure as Education Secretary, to be scrapped as a school performance measure. The government ambition for 90% of Year 10 pupils to be entered for EBAC subjects by 2025 is criticised for being too limiting and not allowing pupils to study a range of subjects. Criticism is also levelled at the overburdened curriculum as a result of content and the 25 to 30 hours of examinations at the end of Year 11. The report echoes some concerns expressed by some teachers and school leaders. Recommendations include allowing schools to offer a more varied range of learning experiences, more opportunities to study creative, vocational and technical subjects, and that pupils should have the option to take functional literacy and numeracy qualifications that are equal in value to GCSEs in English and Maths. Former Education Minister under the Conservatives, Jo Johnson, says the evidence received was compelling and that change was urgently needed. Former Education Secretary Kenneth Baker said dropping the EBAC would give schools greater freedom. Unions welcomed the calls but said school funding, recruitment and retention and cutting workload were essential to making any changes a possibility. A Department for Education spokesperson said, "We are constantly seeing the success of our reforms, citing recently released PISA rankings and being named best in the West for primary reading out of a comparable 43 countries." The Observer focuses on Scottish schools' drop in the PISA ratings and featured an opinion piece by Sonia Soda. The piece lays blame squarely on the curriculum reform which began under the SNP in 2010. It changed the focus from knowledge, emphasising the development of transferable skills. The approach is linked to the idea of preparing children with skills they need for jobs that don't exist yet. But the article says this is a theory based on zero evidence. The article goes on to make links to other countries which made similar changes and saw similar declines, including Sweden and France. It also focuses on the impact such a curriculum has on disadvantaged pupils, increasing, it says, the gap between the non-disadvantaged peers. As the House of Lords report levels criticism at a so-called traditional system in England, it seems that Scotland's more progressive approach is being seen in a similarly negative light. The BBC World Service features a piece on universities in Hong Kong. Once attracting talent from around the world, now academics fear Beijing is restricting academic freedom. In 2021 to 22, more than 360 scholars left 8 public universities. The turnover rate, 7.4%, is at its highest since 1997, when Hong Kong returned to Chinese rule. Foreign student enrolments have dropped by 13% since 2019. Security guards are now a common sight in universities, ensuring that students and visitors must identify themselves. At the Chinese University of Hong Kong, the democracy wall has been stripped bare and a statue of the goddess of democracy is gone. The 2020 National Security Law targets subversive behaviour and has seen libraries emptied of books of bad ideologies and a ban on protests. Job applications for professors have dried up and fewer students are enrolling for PhDs in humanities and social sciences. Some academics say that even being an expert on China is a risk these days. Further details on this story can be found on the BBC News website. Pupils in Liverpool got a Shakespeare masterclass from Ralph Fiennes, which they described as weird but outstanding. The Harry Potter actor is starring in Macbeth at Liverpool's The Depot, but was supporting the Friends with Shakespeare event in a local school. The workshop included warm-up games, group work and language analysis. The star also focused on the theme of ambition in Macbeth and linked it to future plans and careers for students. Finally, GCHQ has released its annual brain teaser for UK school children. Its code-breaking challenge is aimed at 11 to 18-year-olds. More than 1,000 secondary schools signed up for this year's event, according to the BBC Breakfast programme. It is the third edition of the challenge, and it is designed to test code-breaking, maths and analysis skills, with each test designed to be harder than the last. There are 7 tasks in total, and children are encouraged to tackle them in teams, as solving puzzles needs a mix of minds. The full challenge can be found on the GCHQ website, just in case you want to test your own skills. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
And welcome back, everyone, and a welcome in particular to my special guest, Sean Dowling.
Hi.
Thank you for joining me, Sean. How are you?
I'm fine. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear, loud and clear. So I think you're working today, Sean, is that right?
Yeah, well, I'm in the office. It's always better to stay in the office. It's quieter. No one's working on Saturday, and you get things done before the weekend. But tonight is my teacher's sort of dinner. We're going out to celebrate the year. So I have to get some work done. And of course, talk to you. It's better to be in a nice, quiet place.
Okay, well, great. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. And we haven't seen each other since you took me to the football, I think, in Rio.
Yeah, I took you to the Maracana Stadium in Rio. We were there. I don't know what was the conference. Was?
It was Brastisol, I think.
It was at Brastisol, yeah. I don't know if it was Cultura Inglesa or Brastisol because Rio.
Yeah.
We went. Did you go for dinner? I'm going to say I'll drop a name now with
yes.
David Crystal. Was that?
Yes.
Then we went. Yeah,
That
that's
was
right.
it. That was it.
And then we went for the football.
Exactly. Yeah. It was quite an experience. I still.
Yeah, it's fantastic. We had a good time. It was a nice event as well, and it was good to meet you too. But nice to talk to you as well.
Definitely. Likewise. So I usually, Sean, start by asking my guests to talk about how they became involved in education, how they become teachers. And I'd love to hear what it was that attracted you to education, and how you
Well,
became a teacher, and how you ended up in Brazil as well.
yeah, well, I came into sort of education basically because I moved to Brazil. That was why. And I'd say being an immigrant, you have to work hard and find ways of working. So, of course, usually teaching English is something that seems to come easily at first. People want, a native speaker here in Brazil. And I went to a very serious school when I started and was a substitute teacher for about a year. And here in Brasilia, a school that's closed since, was bought by Cultura Inglesa, where I went to live. So I moved really. I had a very young daughter. She was 3 months old. So I had to set up a new life. But I was originally in construction. I worked for a very large company, Balfour Beatty, when I left. So I was dealing with large construction and contracts, for each one lasting 2 or 3 years. But then I did a short course in Bristol. There's a lovely school in Bristol. It gave me a short month course. I didn't really know much about grammar and things like that. So it was good to go on that. They said I was a terrible teacher. And then I moved and found my feet in Brazil. I love Brazil. It's a fantastic place with fantastic people. And that really motivated me to do what I'm doing now, because I found what I was good at, teaching English, of course. I took it seriously, did my Delta, International House. And it was very difficult. And it was a time when you had to, spend 2 months away. I had 2 young kids in London. And then, of course, I was in a Brastisol event, and there was a professor from Birmingham. And we were having a drink one evening, and I was saying, I love teaching collocations, and it's very important to me, and I do this and I do that. And he said, well, you've already got your thesis. And so why don't you join us? And I thought, well, I've never really, I never went to university. I went straight into construction from leaving school, and I've had a family. But of course, things change. You reinvent yourself when you go to a different country, as probably many people will know. And you have to do something different. I couldn't go back into construction, and I was really enjoying myself. Teaching Brazilians, learning as well was a new thing, really. Learning was something which was something fantastic, completely starting again and reinventing yourself. And of course, providing for my family too. So all of those things moved me into education. And of course, we met at Brastisol. So during my time, I was the local president of our Brastisol chapter, and that opened up a new understanding of dealing with different authorities. dealing with different teachers. And then as being present, you were bringing on young teachers. I had lots of experience. We had to promote, in a way, these young teachers. And that was a joy. And every year we would have two reasonably large, they grew large events with me. I was quite good at it, I'm going to say for myself. And then we had a massive national brass TESOL event here in Brasilia, the first time there'd been one in Brasilia. That really called for a lot of learning about how to deal to get such a large event, bring people from around the world, from the United States, from England, for example, from Spain as well, to come and speak to Brazilian teachers, deal with publishers, of course. And as I was a teacher, really, and a teacher trainer, was never a sort of director of studies. I was a mentor for many, many teachers. That's my job also at Cultura Inglesa. So it's a development. I wasn't from an academic background, and I think that helps in a way with what we're learning, what we're going to talk about today in a way with regard to English for corruption, because you have to delve into, isn't that a word you find a lot on ChatGPT? Well, delve into, it's gone into my language now, delve into new areas. And of course, being a new country, I was asked to do a lot of private work. And that's where really you have to be more specialized, because you have people coming from the government. Brasilia, of course, is like, let's say, the Washington of Brazil.
Have you always been in Brasilia?
I've always been in Brasilia. It's a lovely, lovely place to live. I built my house here. I still kept in building. And my kids, of course, went to the schools here. We're a very Brazilian family, although my kids are now abroad. I have two children, by the way. They're in Germany and England, and my wife's Brazilian. And that's why she's the reason I'm here. So really, I'm in education. It's her fault.
Is she from Brasilia?
Yeah, she's from Brasilia. Her family from here. And when we had our Brazilian women, let's say, are very family orientated, which is a thing I like. They're having family very close. And she wanted to come back, stay with her family. Our daughter was 3 months old. So she wanted to be back where something was familiar. We were married 5 years in England. Her English was very good. She went there to study English. So I was always the teacher, I suppose. And we came back because of family. And Brasilia, I'd been before, of course. I knew a bit about Brasilia. And everyone said, when you come, you'll be teaching English. And that's what I did.
Right. Okay. Yeah, Brasilia. I've been to Brasilia, and it's very, very different to anywhere else in Brazil that I found. Not that I know lots of places in Brazil, but it's a very different place, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like another planet, really. The weekends, it could be empty because lots of people go back home to Rio or São Paulo or the north of Brazil. So it's quite quiet, but it's very, very green. And because it's beautifully designed, as people will probably find out if they know anything. It's designed like an aeroplane, and you live on one of the wings. It's a north wing and a south wing. And in the center, in the fuselage, let's say, is where all the main government buildings are. That's where I'm stationed in a way. My office, my location is just off, in that center area. So I can reach the government, or they can reach me, which sometimes they come to my office. Someone needs a private class, I need to prepare to go somewhere and, let's say, tell the world about what Brazil is doing. Then they come and they probably, I'll check their presentation, give them difficult questions, and then send them on their way. And that happens quite a lot. But Brasilia is a government town, so you have to understand how it works. When it's really working hard, it really works hard during the week. And the behavior, of course, is very, very different than in a normal town. But it's a beautiful place. It's very well organized. I love it. Of course, I'm here 30 years. I'm a Brasiliense, as they say, really.
Mm-hmm.
And as it's in the center of the country, then you can get anywhere. So I can go to the north or the south. Last week, I was in the south meeting some state prosecutors. We have a course there for them, and or you can go to those fantastic beaches. Believe me, people, if you're listening to this, the best beaches in the world are not anywhere else other than Brazil, but they're very difficult to get to for some reason, and because they're not developed as much, the tourism is not as developed, they're fantastically unspoiled. Okay, so that's my advertisement for the country. But Brazil is a nice place. It's a difficult place to live if you're used to other places. People from Rio and, let's say, Sao Paulo, the two biggest cities in Brazil, do have to adapt. They do find it difficult. This is why the weekends they like to get on a plane sometimes and go home.
Right. Did you find it easy to adapt to living in Brasilia, Sean?
Well, I found it. I'm a bit of a nomad anyway, so I'm in construction, so I'm moving site to site and house to house, contract to contract when I was in England. And my wife, of course, was not from there, so I was quite happy to move. But of course, setting down roots here, we've got family, so they're a great help. So that any difficulty was lessened by their help. The weather is very, very dry. It's like sometimes like the desert, Sahara Desert, very, very dry. So the first year, it's difficult. And of course, there are not many foreigners here. There were certainly when I arrived. Mm-hmm. So I immersed myself in Brazilian culture, which is the greatest thing I did. The internet wasn't very big at the time, so we would get the Times newspaper, that small sort of tabloid one every month, I think, and would have to take, when I would ring my mother home, we'd have to wait for the telephone company to tell us the line was free. It was very difficult then. So I had to adapt. My wife actually found it more difficult to come home and adapt after 5 years in England than I did. But I wasn't, had no intention of going back. Wasn't really going to pine for anything other than football. We've got lots of football here too. They won the World Cup the year after I was here. So I brought Brazil lots of luck too. So it was nice.
Very good, very good. So Sean, let's turn now to the main subject of today's show, which you suggested we could talk about, which is English for corruption, which sounds fascinating. What is it that got you interested or involved in this?
Well, I got pulled into it really because as a private teacher, people ring you up, say, "Oh, I want to talk about this. I need to improve my English so I can communicate better in English with foreign organizations." So as I worked for 10 years in the diplomatic school here, it's very quite famous in Brazil. Mm-hmm. I was a reference in the government. They would come and ask if I could give private classes. And some of those people who started to come were economists dealing with micro and macroeconomic policy of the government, and then federal investigators, prosecutors, judges, a whole number of people trying to communicate, because corruption, of course, it's within a country, but the money laundering means that the money usually leaves the country. Trying to get that back is also, and you have to have other authorities around the world, and you have to follow international rules, international law. So they need to be able to talk about that and discuss all of these things and feel confident. That's the thing in Brazilian culture. They're not, Brazil is a great place, and it has a lot to teach the rest of the world, actually, with their knowledge, especially in the area of corruption. But the confidence of Brazilians sometimes to push themselves and explain what they're doing, that lack of confidence they have in dealing with authorities in other countries, is something that I've found has been very important in my work, to make them feel confident in communicating what they want to do, and valuing what they do, because it's necessary in corruption for them to be able to negotiate to get money from abroad. So that's another area we have to teach, as well as, in a way, even give presentations or talk to different authorities, either on the phone or writing emails and things like that. And in the end, that turned into being invited to give courses of English with these authorities. So I've given courses for people who were then dealing with some of the largest corruption cases in the world. The last few years, they've had the car wash, or let's say 10 years, which was called Lava Jato. That started here in Brasilia, a small garage.
Could you talk more about that? Because I'm not familiar with that, actually.
Yeah, no. Well, what happened was, just actually, I could walk to the garage from my office. There's a garage that was, let's say, laundering money.
Right.
And it was very strange. And that was, once that was investigated.
So how did you know? And how do you know? Did you know that it was laundering money? How can you tell?
No, I didn't. The investigators found this.
Okay.
If you want to read about car wash, it's an extremely famous case. Okay, they found that, and that was the start of them discovering more and more and larger and larger corruption schemes, and of course, there'd been one large corruption scandal called the monthly payment. Basically, it's called mensalão. And if I talk later about language, of how it's used culturally, later, then I'll explain why it's called mensalão. So the monthly payment, the big monthly payment, was a big corruption scandal here in Brazil, and that started investigating two other things. And this car wash scandal then became another large one, and it looked at, of course, the large oil company in Brazil, Petrobras, and how similar political schemes were being used to, let's say, siphon off money for political gain. It's a long story. There's a lot of things happening. People can read a lot about it. But those investigators, for example, needed to go to Switzerland or to other countries to try and get the money back, or talk to those authorities. Or we had new ideas coming up, the confiscating of people's assets. That's a whole area of language, and also with law as well. Different laws that they have to be they're more familiar with. So, I wasn't just teaching English. We were talking about law. I'm well known for doing legal English as well here in Brasilia. And that's when I was invited to teach people. So private students first came to make it. Private students came, they involved, federal, let's say, police commissioners, economists dealing with, and lawyers dealing with, let's say, what's the word? Corruption of bidding and procurement, and they needed to communicate that. And they had international clients too. So it came to me, and then suddenly the people hear about me, and then government organizations come and say, look, we need. One of them, the first one was the what we call Procuradoria-Geral de República, which is the big prosecution authority. Now, they'd seen that I'd done a short course for the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
So they invited me, said, okay, we're in international cooperation, and we need to tell our people, our civil servants in Brazil, a little about our areas of law that deals with English. Child abduction, for example. What was the other one? Child abduction, extradition, and corruption. Mm-hmm. So can you make an English course with that? And we'll put it online for all of our people around Brazil. For us, please. They knew who I was, and we need something special. So I did that. And that went to the union. So what we say the union is for the federal and the state and the local municipalities. It goes all over Brazil. So that was an online course I did for them. And then federal prosecutors, and some of them were doing that course, said, well, can you give us just specific courses? Now, these are the federal prosecutors. They're also, most of them were involved in this car wash operation. Mm-hmm. Now, in the car wash, it was focused mainly in the south of Brazil, in Curitiba. Mm-hmm. That's where the main focus was. And they were, of course, focusing on the state oil company, Petrobras. Now, if you go and find out about corruption in the world, you see the oil, of course, companies are famous for lots of corruption. So, I don't think Lava Jato found anything that they weren't expecting. I feel like there's some very good podcasts on corruption. But they came, and they were, of course, weren't just in Curitiba. I had to do an immersion, I think, for some of them as well. I had to do an immersion of 1 week, just me, English for corruption and these other areas as well. And then they asked me to do a special course. So there was these federal prosecutors, they're called procuradores here. They have a special role, and they needed that confidence in English. Okay, they need that confidence in English. I can talk about those issues. I think someone's sending a message as well. I can talk about lots of good things about the government as well, but this is a specific area that I work with. So these procuradores were all over the country looking at corruption. And of course, trying to find out and talk to people and feel confident using English and communicate well is also what they needed. It was in a way a new skill for them. They didn't expect to be looking, I expect, outside of the country and talking to authorities outside of the country. So these investigators, let's say, these prosecutors, invited me, and I gave them, I think it was 3 or 4 courses specifically for that. And then that moved on to the doing the federal auditors. So then we had the auditors, and then we had the Controller General as well. They were all in this because corruption was such a focus. Has been a focus over the last 10 years. The international, and these are international companies or international dealings of money, and you needed English. So there weren't many teachers, let's face it, in Brazil
specialized in this.
Exactly. So I was the only one.
Right.
And
could you talk a little bit about that first course that you put together about English for corruption? How on earth did you kind of approach it? Find out what kind of things they needed? Was it from a legal English point of view?
It was legal English, but legal English, of course, if English teachers are out there, they'll know the old ELEC books, maybe, which are excellent books to start if you want to teach legal English. I forgot, by Cambridge.
Yeah.
International legal English, but it's international legal English. It's not really, let's say, corruption international English. It's talking about various other areas. but it gives you gave me a good model to use
Right.
to produce my own material. Okay.
Yeah.
There was also the only one piece of information I found out was in a very small book, which is it's also it's free to copyright as from copyright law. It's called Taboos and Issues. It's an old book, and I know one of the authors, Ron Martinez, so I'll give a shout out for him. And in there was 2 pages on corruption. So and dealing with that, and that allowed me to start. Yeah, and
Yeah.
then of course I have private students. You know, I've had federal, let's say FBI agents. That's easier to say that. They're not American, of course, they're Brazilian. Those federal investigators who came and need to communicate with other countries, with international investigations and stuff like that. And of course, they started to not give me anything specific about their investigation, but you know, I started to understand how Brazil was working at a different level. And then I was able to produce scenarios or texts to use in the course. Okay. And that was the start. So it was legal English, of course. You can't talk about corruption without legal English. And that first 2 pages in Taboos and Issues, I would definitely recommend it. It's a bit old now, but still it's a good start if you want to specialize in an area. And that was it. And of course, the knowledge of those people who I was teaching. So you have to take all that, because, for example, you'd be teaching someone privately, and then so you would send them a text in their area of corruption, and then you get them to talk about it, to use the vocabulary, and to check their grammar, and then to use that as let's say a springboard for them to talk about their own areas as well. So with private work, that's where I was able to gain a lot of material as well to use. And that material, of course, I used in my courses. And then, so when you're giving the courses to the prosecutors, they're going, wow, I didn't expect an English teacher to know this, you know, and it's very cultural, but of course it's also a very international thing. And that's where English was also necessary, let's say.
Right. And you talked a little bit about specialities and preparing courses for specific specialities. Could you expand a little on that?
Well, yeah, it's funny. The government comes and says, we want a course on this. And can you do it? And of course, you're never going to say no, are you? If someone's going to come and say, we want to give you a course, you're never going to say no. You've got to embrace it. You've got to do a lot of research, a lot of talking to specialists in that area. Anyway, I'm very lucky. I've been here for 30 years. So my network is full of specialists who I can reach out to. For example, I was asked can you give something about food security? That's one of the areas. So I was able to talk to someone from the Ministry of Agriculture who was my student and said, can you give me an hour's talk on the main areas? And she's very happy to, the person I asked, she was very happy to speak to me for an hour and get a free private class. And then I was able to take the main information and ask the questions to be able to develop a course. Right. And that happens a lot as well. So the first thing is to say, sometimes, I was worried, the first course I gave was the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. And I had here's an example. I only had 3 students for legal English. It's very funny, legal English. And I used the elect book, and it had nothing to do with Brazilian law. It was because talking about common law, and here we've got constitutional law. Mm-hmm. So a codified law. So it's quite different. And that difference I understood when dealing with this material and having the confusion and having those lawyers in my course. And I advertise on my website, have a legal English. And then the SDF, which is the Supreme Court, said, oh, we want a legal English course. We need it for our areas. And I thought, wow, I'm going to the Supreme Court. And I've taught a few people at the Supreme Court, so I wasn't really that afraid. I'd been in there and taught some ministers as well. But then this is my company being invited. And so I went there to talk to them. And how luck would have it, I was there telling them, they were very suspicious. Do you really know what you're doing? And then someone walked in the room who was an old student of mine and said, Sean, how is Liverpool football doing? And suddenly, and it was very important, they all said, well, this guy must be good. And then I just produced a course. They loved it. Of course, I did know what I was doing. And that, when you give a class, let's say a 120-hour course to the top government agency of law, then the others hear about it. They hear it, and so it's many different ways. Private work, finding material, listening to different people, reading, of course, reading a lot. You have to buy books. I get lots of books from Amazon and read them. And use some of that material, and that's why I thought there's one single way of doing it. But no, teaching material sometimes can help give you a model, I think, for making material. I have to write my own material mostly, and for these courses. And I tend to do that. I don't really go to courses out to the public. I do really just for the government.
And Sean, do you tend to focus upon a few skills in particular, or is it a really integrated skills course that you do? Is it speaking and listening that they need more than anything else, or do they need to do a lot of reading and writing as well?
Yeah, vocabulary is the main thing that they feel.
Right.
And speaking, of course. Reading, there's usually lots of reading material we can find. You have to shorten those texts, of course, because they're busy people. The government, they don't have time to read a lot. They usually come to class just to be able to deal with English in that time. So it's speaking mainly, of course, because they don't have opportunity to speak. So that they need that regular opportunity with English as well, of course, but mainly speaking and improving their vocabulary too. So you have to give them also strategies of learning outside if they've got time, and try and give them more autonomous ways of learning and forming habits to learn. I specialized in that in my master's. So lots of vocabulary, of course, reading, because Brazilians, we have to understand that Brazilians are at high level, usually they're high level learners because they have to pass an exam to become a civil servant. And the exams are very, very difficult in Brazil. I also prepare people for these exams, but that's another issue.
When you say exams, you mean an English exam?
No, sorry. For example, you want to become a civil servant.
Yeah.
So let's say a diplomat, for example. I teach a lot of a lot of examination practice for diplomats. So to become a diplomat, you've got to know everything about history, Brazilian history, international history. You've got to know everything about international law, politics, international politics, geography, economics. Of course, you've got to have extremely high level of Portuguese and English. So English is one of those areas. And these, what they call concursos, these public exams, I think they've got them in India. I don't know many other places, maybe in South Africa too, are very competitive because it's a very secure job when you work for the Brazilian government. Basically, you can't get sacked. You've got a job for life. So there are many different subjects. And for example, the one for diplomacy, you really need an extremely high level of English. So you need a very high level of teacher who understands Brazilian foreign policy, and of course can push people up to write, because not speaking in these exams, to write to a very high level. So they're very, very competitive in Brazil, because Brazil is a large state, and the state governments it's in a way to stop corruption. They have civil servant exams, so people in a way have given an equal chance to pass the exam. Of course, yeah, I'll say that for now, an equal chance to pass the exams, and if they pass, and then the top level, then they will be asked to join the government and work. So as it's a job for life, then you get paid reasonably well for Brazilian standards, and you get a good pension. So that's why people do them. So where were we? I forgot where we were now. So
talking about the skills that you generally concentrate on speaking with the
so it's mainly speaking, because with these exams they're focusing on writing and reading, so they're reading and writing in a way to a high level. Not all of, for example, with the, as I said, these prosecutors or the federal police, or the controller general or auditors, they don't have a need for a high level of English in these exams. So if it's an exam for a diplomat, really you need a high level of English. So in a way, when they're learning, their English is forced to get to a very high level. Mm-hmm. But with these other areas of the civil service, it's not so. So they've got a lower level of English. They've got an intermediate level of English. Mm-hmm. They're sort of middle class Brazilians here. So they've studied English when they were young, but forgot it after a period of time.
Right.
So when they come back to me for a course, then they've sort of got an intermediate level. And of course, to be able to talk to foreign authorities, they need to have a lot more confidence in speaking and writing. So it's more focused on that, especially speaking, to be able to communicate well. So that's the main focus. So in a way, talking to them, asking them difficult questions, having them explain what they do, because of course one country's law or one country's culture is quite different to another. So there's a lot of sort of translation of information that they have to do for people to understand where they're coming from and what they need from the other country, and to avoid confusion. And as I said, Brazilians always need more boost of confidence, to face up to that. So you have to ask them difficult questions and go deeper, that they say, wow, I can talk about that. I can deal with this subject. I do know what I'm talking about. And those simple, let's say, eureka moments that happen during the class are the things that give them confidence to be able to then communicate with other foreign authorities as well. So there's a lot of that. Of course, lots of vocabulary. And it's not necessarily new vocabulary as well, because there's, in corruption, there's lots of similar words as well. But it's usually getting them to use the words, it's going to sound strange, that they already know, because they don't use them. Yeah. So getting to speak about these subjects, getting to use those words and study those words in a way that they know, but in really a higher level. So we're looking at focusing on collocations a lot. Just simple verbs and nouns, or adjective and nouns, and get them to see how a language is put together so they can express themselves better. So they're the main things: reading, speaking, of course some writing, lots of vocabulary, and that they are the main things off the top of my head.
Okay, I see. And are you pretty much the only one doing this, do you think, Sean, or do you come across other people in Brasilia who are also doing similar kinds of to you?
I think probably I don't know if there are any. I've never come across any. There are, of course, teachers working. The Brazil has its specialist schools, like the diplomatic school where I worked for 10 years. So we're preparing people to be diplomats. So I was there for 10 years. So there are there are a few teachers, but they're based in those institutes, those government schools. They don't move outside. They don't feel confident to do, and they don't take on private classes. They're quite happy in their little, let's say, their school doing their thing. But no, I get called to go to other places and do other things. I've always been, as I said, a private. My first private class was, when I needed money, was teaching three young teenagers, okay, in a city outside of Brasilia. I needed the money, so I have to go to places where you'd never go normally and meet people you never meet, and then understand what their needs are. So it's the same thing. People ring, said, "Oh, I need this, I want that," or they come to me now and they say, "Well, you're the guy." It's nice to say that. It's terrible. I feel I know who you are, I know what you do, and I want to be able to improve my English with you.
Right.
I think you've got the love to do it.
So
there aren't many. No one's been here for 30 years, Graham. So, and there are not many foreigners as well. People, of course, as English teachers, we tend to go to a country, teach there, and then leave after, let's say, 4 or 5 years. I came to settle down with my wife to be, a resident and live in Brazil. I wasn't going to go back. So, my focus was always going to be, how can I live here well? And then see what happens from there. So there aren't any teachers. But what we're doing now, now I have a company, which is the nice thing. So what the government would originally do, for example, I would be employed just as a teacher, earning per hour. And it was not really a lot working for the government. Depends if you've got a master's or a doctorate or something like that. That would be the only increment, would mean you get more money. But you pay a lot of tax. So I thought, and I said, I've got to make my own company. But then to make your own company, because of corruption, you can't just have a company and then the government are going to employ you. No, you've got to go into bidding and procurement and tendering and things like that. Things that I was familiar in construction in the past. So that would be difficult even to employ me as a company. Right. But as a specialist, that as they come to me, you're the only one who can do this. Please give us a course, let's say, on corruption. Then they can employ me as a specialist. Of course, I'm not very expensive anyway. It's not like millions and millions I'm earning. So there's legal limits that they can employ people as a specialist, and they can employ me as a company. Now I have a company, I can bring in other teachers who I know are fantastic. Yeah. I'm going out with them tonight, which is lovely. And they wouldn't get the access that I would get. Okay. Because maybe Brazilian, as well. Some Brazilians don't feel that other Brazilians have the necessary level of language. Of course, they're non-native speakers. I hate that word, but there we are. And so they would always, of course, as happens around the world, I'd love it to be able to change, but they will always look for a native speaker. So now I can bring Brazilians into the company and say, look, this is how we're going to look at public administration, we're going to look at economy, and here's some information. Go ahead, and here's a group we have. We're dealing with procuradores in the state, at the south at the moment, which is quite a large number of people. And these are now teaching. They're starting off, of course, with a book as well. a course book. And during that time, I'm saying, okay, now get them to do presentations, get them to write this, get them to talk about their work more. So they gradually become more specialized in understanding the needs of the student, and then we adjust the course for their needs. Usually they go up from a lower level to immediate level, and they come to me at a higher level to do full legal English because they're
Right.
lawyers, state attorneys, for example. So I'm now only starting to bring in other people, okay? Because now the company you have to be a company for a certain period of time. You have to be a company for at least 5 years, credible. You have to pay your taxes. You can't do anything wrong, because after these corruption scandals, then everything is very difficult with employing anyone
Yeah.
in the government. So you have to follow the law very carefully and do always the right thing. And then, of course, it opens. So my company is now a specialist for the government. It's seen as renowned, but it's very small. And now it's growing a little bit more, which is nice.
Right, great. And are things getting better in Brazil? You said that there've been sort of 10 years where there's a real focus on this corruption, and I presume that things are getting better, and the corruption is disappearing. I would hope. Is that the case, or is it always a constant struggle? And
It's always a constant struggle. I'm glad you said that at the end, because I was trying to find the words to say, because of course it's very politically charged as well, because as you're a foreigner here, people don't really want you to say bad things about Brazil.
no,
And of course I work with the government, they're just down the road with me, and the government changes, and you have to understand that, and it can get difficult. I don't get involved. I have taught some of the top politicians in the country. Of course I have. But they tend to have a state, let's say, position. So they're representing the state.
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm going there because they're a politician. But I have done classes with one person who was trying to become president of the country. I knew he wouldn't win.
right.
So it's difficult to say it's corruption. There have been because it's gone up and down. I privately, I would say one thing. Publicly, I couldn't say. But have I told people involved in corruption? Yes, I have, and working very hard. Have they suffered? They've suffered a lot. Are they a problem? I don't know as well. But certain things are beyond me. It's politics, and we live in a town where politics works. So it's shifted. Certainly, I can say the focus on politics. But I've been involved in so many different areas. This current government is different, very different. The last one, this is left wing. The other's right wing. I try not to give allegiance to one or the other. I'm there to provide a service. But, there are some things I do appreciate what they're doing, very much so. And when they come to me, I'm so happy to help. And I think it's a difficult question to ask. I think corruption exists all over the world. It's a constant battle, as we've said. And understanding that it's linked, and with markets opening, trading between different countries as well, it's bigger, and people are getting poorer, others are getting richer, and that's not just because of talent and other things. It's because of the movement of money around the world, and that the paying of the non-payment of taxes or the avoidance of taxes. And those things are corruption. It's difficult to even say what corruption is, because it's a behavior.
Right.
It's how you behave. We call corruption illicit behavior as well. So sometimes your behavior, you don't even know you're involved in corruption. You could be a civil servant working hard, passing one piece of paper to the next. You've checked everything, and you don't even know you're part of a corruption scheme. Yeah.
Right.
Or knowing whether it's improved or, or got worse or it's better, it's a very difficult thing to measure. It doesn't, for example, we have a word transparency. We think that the world would be less corrupt if it's more transparent. Transparency is no guarantee for corruption. As I said, people could be working, thinking they're doing everything right, and they could be involved in corruption, and they wouldn't even know it, right? Because it can be a wider, bigger scheme. Or some people might even know they're doing the corruption, and those people around them not, and they're telling them what to do.
Well, to go back to what you were talking about before with money laundering, you could be working for a company or you could be buying from a company that is involved in money laundering, and you maybe not be aware of it.
Exactly. Well, you've got to know, there's one of the terms, know your customer, or beneficial owner. That's the term in corruption, an international term. You have to know who you're getting your money, who's paying you, basically. Yeah. And if you don't, then that's where in Europe, they're focusing more on oligarchs than necessarily than here in Brazil. How money moves between one company and another, it's put in banks, and the bank doesn't know who it comes from. Switzerland has been going through this. So you have to know who's paying you, where it's come from. And that's why people work, Brazil is 50% formal money, let's say, formal work, and 50% informal work. So that informal work is done with cash. And many countries are like that. Developing countries work a lot in cash. As probably maybe it's the same in Mexico, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot of cash informal work in Mexico.
Yeah, and I had a great friend. We're having a barbecue, and I joke with him, so how can I avoid paying tax? And he's a head tax authority. So come on, tell me, how can I avoid paying tax? I said, no, we'll find you, Sean. We'll get you. But if you deal in cash, then it's very difficult. As soon as you put it in the bank, as soon as you register it some way, we can find out. So in a country that works a lot with cash, of course, that's where a lot of corruption can go on. People won't pay their taxes. But it's not just at a high level. It's all the way down to, let's say, the average citizen has to work in cash. And for, let's say, where we came from in England, or say in the United States, you're not paying tax because you're working in cash. You'll be caught by the authorities and put in prison.
Right.
Here, the tax also system is very, very difficult to understand. They're going to change the tax system, thank goodness, hopefully this year. It's been going on for many years. But to try anyway, get people to be able to have more confidence in paying tax and paying, registering their money as well. Because, of course, a lot of money is being lost. And you can say that's a corrupt way, but that's how people live as well. Because to earn money, they're heavily taxed. So they all prefer to work certainly in small amounts, in cash. Of course, very large amounts of cash are clearly from corruption schemes. But they can be filtered down, a specific language for that, integrated into the system, in many different ways by basically buying assets and paying in cash, cars or even apartments. Every time I mention a word, it moves on to another possible discussion on different corruption schemes. Yeah,
right.
And I can go on about that, but we'd be going on forever. But the main one, going back to the car wash scheme, was one where companies were bidding over the amount for contracts, and also paying, let's say, backhanders to those people working there, and helping, of course, political parties as well. It's all documented. I don't think it's any problem talking about that. But there are other ways as well to siphon off money. One also, I had lunch with one prosecutor, very, very good prosecutor once. We were talking about this, and he said, yeah, it's terrible. And in a way, sometimes you have to look at it to those people who are stealing the money for themselves, and those ones that are taking the money for their political party so they can maintain their party in a way where they can maintain in power, or keep their parties going, so they're part of the political system, because it's very competitive, of course. And of course, those ones who steal the money, we're going to get the political ones who are siphoning up money. They call it cachadores here, which is like a pot of money where they people put money in and they distribute to who needs it to fight, let's say, elections and things like that. So that's another scheme. And you've got to understand that culture when you're teaching. Going back to teaching corruption, you have to understand that there are each country has sometimes different scheme and different names. I talked about the monthly payment, mensalão. So aão in Portuguese means big. It's a big monthly payment. The government was paying to politicians for votes in the Congress here, which we see in many places around the world. This same scheme. So they use aão to make it big. But for example, a small corruption, okay? For example, you give someone a tip. Let's say it's a tip. We used to think when we were young, we would give a tip to the guy who was cutting our hair. They don't do this in Brazil. They don't give tips to people. They give tips in other ways. And it's called a little coffee. It's so nice because Brazil is the country of coffee. So they would give a little coffee instead. So a little coffee. No, it's not weird. It's an informal way of giving money. Oh, you give me a little help. You grease my palm, of course, is a common. So give me a little coffee. So you have to understand that when we're translating these terms, because it's very cultural. It's quite informal. And that translation is very important for, let's say, government authorities to understand, is this scheme the same in another country as it is here? So it requires a lot of reading also of what's happening, let's say, in other countries that are considered more corrupt than others, because it's easier to read those information. So we're looking at, countries in Africa or let's say former Soviet Union. Those places are seen as being more corrupt. I think everywhere's corrupt. Myself, sometimes you get so brainwashed with corruption, you see things day to day and say, well, that's corrupt, I was listening to The Guardian. I don't know if you were listening to The Guardian at the start, talking about in England, the changes to the education system and something else. And I was thinking, well, where's the corruption scheme in there? Where's the money coming? Why are they making that change? Who is gaining from that change? Who is losing?
So I guess you have that mindset where you're so sort of involved in it, and you've become an expert now, that you're looking for evidence of that everywhere.
You do, because there are bigger questions than we can talk about. There are bigger questions of corruption, because it goes to democracy and things like that, and politics and things, and it goes to a larger thing. But of course, there has to be a conversation of corruption, and it's authorities talking one to another. And English, of course, is what moves money. Banks are in English. Tax havens, of course, are in English. Most of them are English and Dutch, as well, I think. But everything's in English, so the whole system is in English. To say English is a world language, it is a world language, and corruption is part of that too.
So you could say English is the language of corruption.
Well, yes, yes, it is. It's the language of the world. So corruption is part of the world. So yeah, you have to be, if one corrupt organization is going to talk to another corrupt organization, another,
It's going to be in English.
they're going to be doing it in English, So so of course you're not teaching them to be corrupt. I'm not going to teach people how to be corrupt, but you have to understand that, if organizations, if international authorities, international cooperation is necessary, it's going to be done in English. So, I've been involved a lot with diplomats and, of course, and different international organizations in Brazil, government-based, and they have to communicate in English. This year I was working with the Supreme Audit authorities in Brazil who were applying to become auditors of the United Nations, and which was very interesting. So they had their crack team to talk to the other countries who are already auditors of the United Nations to find out what they actually do. So they invited me to talk to them, for us to formalize questions, for them to feel confident in going to those countries and investigating how they, how many people they're going to need, what they're going to do, how they've got to apply. And so, everything is English. They went to Chile, they went to France, and they had to speak in English. And so I think they're successful now in becoming auditors, which is lovely.
Great.
Yeah.
Do you ever get invited to accompany people on trips abroad?
No. Some of my old teachers have, Brazilian teachers, but they work within the government. Only one or two. Right. Why? Because one was involved in a corruption case. A teacher of mine at Cultura Inglesa, and he studied law, so he was in a government department, and they asked him to go and, in a way, I don't know if it was interrogate, but certainly question one of their cooperators that was in England. So there we are, you're an English teacher, and then you'd be saying, come on, we're going to do, we're in a big corruption investigation case, a big task force, and you're the English teacher, so you speak English better than us, we want you to come and do that. And the teacher go, my goodness, because, they were afraid to use their English. They needed someone who had better English than them. That he's no expert in law or corruption, but suddenly he's asked to go because they couldn't find anywhere else. We see the lack of English focus in the country, that they have to find someone and do it, but not me. No, of course. I'm not Brazilian. I don't have a Brazilian passport. Someone this year asked me to go somewhere next year, and a politician, and I said no, I wouldn't go, because I know if someone, it would get into the newspapers that an English teacher is gone out to a big event, and he might want me to help him with his English, but all of those prosecutors who I teach would say, Sean, why you're being corrupt for, so they'd ring me up, and no, I don't do that. I do, of course, have networking is very important, of course, because it's a matter of trust and being honest with the government to be able to do that. They have to trust you as well. So a lot of private students, or even students I taught at Cultura Inglesa when they were 13 or 14 years old, are now after 30 years in the government. Yeah. So they know their old funny teacher from that time. They remember the socks I wore and the football shirt I used to wear when I used to go into class. And of course, now they're inviting me to go and talk to their bosses and deal with them. So I don't really get invited. No, I don't get invited. And also, since COVID, I'm sitting on my I'm in my office now. I sit in my desk most of the time and deal with people online.
Right, of course, that makes sense. So
Yeah.
you saw a big change to teaching online after COVID. Were you teaching online before COVID, or has it been subsequent to COVID that you're teaching those online classes?
Yeah, I was teaching online because Brazil is a big place, of course. And I was talking about those government exams. So people are hoping to pass these government exams. They're based all over Brazil, and they don't. And it used to be that before really the internet came up or developed, let's say, they had to leave their states, thousands and thousands of miles away and move, which is costly, to the main capitals like Brasilia to study. Of course, when the internet came up and we were able to do courses online, then companies started to do that. One company I worked for, Clipping, which is an excellent company. I'll put another shout out for Clipping, invited me to work with them. And then then I'm teaching hundreds of people online throughout the country. The classes are recorded all live and producing material. And I learned from that. But I'd already my own company had my own small courses. And really, when it came to these exams, then I would earn maybe money with that. And I had smaller courses that people would, so it kept my business ticking over. So I was very familiar with working online, but who really wasn't familiar with online courses was really Brazil, because these government organizations have thousands of people, and they usually have enough money to invite the teachers. I used to do presential classes, face-to-face classes, and as I'm in Brasilia, it's easier that they would. It's cheaper for them to employ me than bringing someone from other places. But then, of course, after lockdown, all of the rest of the states said, "Well, we still need to keep our people happy at home and keep them trained. English, all English teachers can do it. Now let's look for. Now we can get Sean that we know. I met him, or we've seen him before. Sean, how do you fancy doing a course for us here or there about this?" And so then everyone moved online, and that's how it is now. Brazil's a massive country. So as I said, the furthest, you were in Uruguay, so the nearest state to Uruguay is Rio Grande do Sul. Although I'm based in Brasilia, I have courses with the government there. They invited me, and that's been a big development in my company. I was there last week, but I don't need to go down and visit them. So then other organizations like, say, the Supreme Court was before the COVID, but after that, with the prosecutors and corruption as well, it became easier for them to accept that online courses were just as good. They could get the information. So in a way, COVID did me a favor, because then people in other states are saying, "Oh, I need a teacher for this. Who do I find?" They find me online. They can't find a teacher of my type where they live. And then they request courses or request private classes as well. And they don't have a barrier with regard to these types of classes now.
Right, of course. So apart from the move to teaching online, Sean, what other changes have you seen in recent years with the way that you work, or the way that you teach, or how students want to learn, etc.? Have you seen that change much?
No, I went to IETFL this year in Harrogate and didn't see anything there. Actually, I was quite disappointed. I was hoping to see some things new, especially in the area of vocabulary, which I enjoy. I didn't see anything at all. Maybe in Brighton next year might be better. But in Brazil, of course, Brazil is a very large market.
Yeah.
And we've seen it become full of, of course, as happened, the gig economy. We're in the gig economy. Lots of teachers are older. Myself, it happened to as well. I'm not teaching anymore. Those ones with great experience who know what they're doing. The older ones are less, and young teachers who with less experience or no real experience, who are fixed into a method the school tells them how to teach and can't move away, a sort of straitjacket. That's got more. Franchising has been bigger as well in Brazil, as larger schools have been able to change their name and have smaller schools in different regions. That's within the market, but I don't see a big improvement in English. Certainly not. I remember who was the gentleman who wrote English Next.
David Gravel.
Yeah, so he came to Brasilia quite a few times, and we talked. We had beer quite a few times. Lovely, lovely guys. Shame he's not around anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And the government was saying, "Oh yeah, we do English here, we do English there, and English there." And even the British Council believed that English was getting better here. I couldn't understand it. And he came, and of course he was investigating where English was, and he couldn't see it himself. But we have a funny saying in Brazil: "It's for the English to see." Okay, so it's a very cultural thing where the government says it's like this, and they paint a picture, and they show certain things, and you think, oh, it must be like that. They're just a facade. It's another form of corruption as well, for the English to see, it goes back historically with the Portuguese coming under the protection of the British Navy fleet. Goes back very historically. So I have this saying in the culture. So they would bring these authorities and say, look, we do loads of English, we do Spanish and everything else, and we do all of these things, when actually they don't. There's no investment at all in education, of course, is an area which is extremely corrupt, as well as health. But I'm going to talk about corruption. And no, I don't see, with regard to English, there is a need, of course, but Brazil is never as open as it should be with regard to what it's doing, and also its trade. It's still got Brazil's got a great capacity for trade. I was in the port of Paranaguá last week, seeing how soya beans basically are being shipped off all the way around the world. Wow, it's a fantastic system to see that. I'm teaching the port as well. English. So they've got a great capacity. The agriculture in Brazil can feed the world. Right. And they really are at a very low capacity at the moment. There's still a lot to do. Brazil could be self-sufficient in alcohol for cars, your biofuels. It's a political will that they don't wish to do. The government are saying they're going to change it and want to change it, but it's for the English to see sometimes. Okay, real decisions that can make a real change don't always happen because politics gets in the middle. So we understand that. So English now, I don't see it getting any better, but with regard them, Brazil is talking to the world. Usually it was only the Foreign Affairs Ministry. Now, as I'm teaching, let's say, other international international cooperation in auditing, and also the laws change with regard investigating companies, that if the companies are Brazilian companies or foreign companies who've been corrupt abroad, that they can be investigated by Brazilian authorities here as well. So that sovereignty issue is changed. That affects English. International law, of course, international cooperation as well is in that area with, I said, prosecutors dealing with big international cases, as we saw with car wash. So the government needs to communicate more specialist areas than just going to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where I worked for 10 years. And that's why I'm invited to talk or give courses to others for them to get the confidence to be able to, when they are communicating with other authorities, more specialist authorities, mergers, acquisitions authorities, the economic authorities as well. They need an investigation to corruption. Of course, that's another area of theirs. Is also a large international question. And Brazil is it's not a small company. Not a small country.
Mm-hmm.
So it's involved in the world. So it needs to communicate. And these specialist organizations, these different government organizations, are starting to do so as it opens. And that's a very positive sign as well for Brazil. I do love Brazil. I sometimes, I'm talking just Brazil, but we see Brazil do have a lot to offer the rest of the world, and its lack of communication in English holds it back.
Yeah.
And that's why I like helping them with the class as well, so they can make that change. They can go abroad, they can even study abroad, and show that they have something to offer as well.
Of course. Well, Sean, I'm going to wind things up now. I want to thank you very much for this conversation. I've learned a lot from what you've been talking about for the last hour or so.
My wife says I talk too much.
No, it was really interesting. I've learned a lot about Brazil, but also about the area of work English for corruption, which is a fascinating subject. I can see why you're interested in specializing in it, and I'm sure it sounds like it brings you in contact with a lot of very interesting people as well, which must be great.
It is. Well, I have to say, it's a serious subject, corruption, but it's fun as well. Yeah, it's fun seeing how weird things are. We've spoken, I don't know, an hour. I don't know how long it is, hour and a half. But there's so much more to talk about. But English teachers shouldn't be afraid to specialize and use the information that their students come to them, especially with private work. Private work, you get a lot of information from students who need to communicate to other people. They've got their own knowledge, and understanding that knowledge and learning from them and finding texts for them that they can help you understand, because they end up teaching you. And you become a specialist in that area. Right? So, not just staying within the four walls of your school, but when those, anyone asks you to give private class, that's not enough money, or I have to travel. You have to think about the learning opportunity you're going to get, the connections you're going to make as well, because that will bring on other work in the future. It may not be now, but it plants a seed for the future. And it's a long-term thing. Education is a long-term thing as well. And our own development, teacher development, is a long-term investment we make. We must always be investing in ourselves as well. So sometimes taking on things a little difficult brings us great rewards in the future, I think.
Of course. Well, thank you very much, Sean. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday and weekend. It's been great to talk to you and catch up.
Yeah, lovely. It's the first podcast I've ever done, so it's very nice. All the best. And anyone who's got questions, of course, can always contact, us here in the podcast, and you let me know, and I'll be able to help. Okay?
Great. Thanks a lot.
All the best. Ciao.
Bye.
Are you looking for lesson planning materials to kickstart the new term?
we've got you covered. The Day is a global online resource that turns the news into lessons. We're offering listeners a free resource on Andrew Tate that you can find on thedaynews.co/Tate. Inspire personal development and critical thinking for your students by downloading the Tate Debate today and feel more confident addressing sensitive topics with your class. Visit thedaynews.co/Tate to find out more.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
In today's educational environment, students and teachers are juggling a mix of face-to-face, online and blended learning courses. Canvas by Instructure helps teachers navigate these diverse learning experiences with a user-friendly virtual learning environment that offers flexible access to courses and a consistent learning experience, all while streamlining everyday teaching processes. The world's best schools and universities are using Canvas to create dynamic courses, collaborate seamlessly, and access actionable data that drives student success.
And thank you very much to today's special guest, Sean Dowling, and all of you who joined us live for today's show. That's all from me, and there are Teachers Talk radio shows all week on all manner of interesting topics, so please listen in live or to the recordings. And this will be my last show till next year. So I hope you will enjoy your holidays if you get the chance to take some time off, and I look forward to speaking to you again in 2024. Bye for now.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.